The sound of heavy breathing filled the courtroom as the judge delivered the final verdict. Rick Harrison and Austin Chumley Russell completely crumbled under the weight of the sentence, collapsing in shock. The entire United States was stunned when Rick, once hailed as the living encyclopedia of reality television, unexpectedly received a life sentence without parole. The image of him being handcuffed and silently escorted out of the courtroom quickly became the most shared moment of the week. If you found this story shocking and noteworthy, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any videos. Share this video with your friends to uncover more undisclosed details about this case. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section. Rick Harrison, a dark side never seen before. What shocked the public was not just the verdict. It was Rick's impulsive and furious reaction in court, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor he had maintained throughout his career. That became the focal point. In an unprecedented, heated confrontation, Rick slammed the table and loudly challenged both the judge and the prosecutor. Once seen as a symbol of knowledge and business ethics, he was now accused of leading an international network involved in smuggling artifacts, money laundering, and tax evasion. The pristine reputation he had spent 15 years building was now at risk of completely unraveling. The case sparked widespread debate across academic circles and among viewers. Was this the fall of a cultural icon, or just a piece of a larger, yet-to-be-uncovered conspiracy? And the question that lingered in everyone's minds: what truly went through Rick Harrison's mind at the moment the verdict was read? Rick Harrison, the storyteller of history on television. Since the debut of Pawn Stars in 2009, Rick has captivated audiences not only with rare antiques, but also with the way he breathes life into each item, as if telling a vivid historical story. Whether it's a Roman coin or an 18th century map, he instantly takes viewers on a journey through its origins, context, and value, making people believe that he's not just a businessman, but a guardian of heritage, a scholar in the guise of an entrepreneur. Rick became a rare figure in an era where knowledge is often overshadowed by the media. With his calm demeanor and profound wisdom, he once said, "I know what I'm doing, and I know I'm always right." It wasn't just a statement. It was a way of life that guided him through difficult times. Rick believed that knowledge was a shield against all risks. Yet, ironically, that very belief would later become the chain that bound his fate. His success in the antiques trade had allowed Rick to build an emotional immunity mechanism, a protective layer against market risks, accusations, and even jealousy from rivals. But this time, that armor couldn't save him. Everything was falling apart, and the man once admired for his calmness and deep knowledge now faced the greatest challenge of his life. Rick faced every challenge in life with cold logic and reason, sometimes as sharp as a blade, other times as steadfast as a stone wall. Over time, he built a thick armor, shielding himself from raw emotion. Rick learned to hide everything behind a stern gaze and a monotone voice. In the world of reality TV, where emotions are often exaggerated, Rick became a paradox. The quieter he was, the more attention he attracted. Yet it was this prolonged suppression of emotions that led to his imbalance, a quiet pride, a blind belief that he was invincible. The beginning of the crisis, the first signs. Then one day, rumors surfaced. An unverified social media post claimed that Rick was under federal investigation for tax evasion and trading unregistered artifacts. His reaction? A half smirk of disdain. This will blow over. For Rick, this wasn't reassurance. It was the declaration of someone who believed they were beyond the reach of the law. For decades, he had learned to dismiss accusations as mere noise, and he thought this was just another passing media storm. But he was wrong. And that mistake marked the beginning of the breakdown of trust. Rick's reaction was not surprising from a psychological perspective. Those who live too long in the glow of power, influence, and admiration often develop an extremely strong ego defense system. They view the world as a puzzle they always have the solution to. They fail to notice the changed gaze of others, the caution in reporters' questions, or the growing wave of doubt. Rick was no different. Even as the investigative details started to become clearer, he still didn't react. No press conference, no legal rebuttal, no explanation. Many called this silence composure. But psychologically, it was a form of emotional paralysis, a common trait in those unable to accept the collapse of the worldview they had built. For Rick, calmness was no longer a strategy. It became a defense mechanism that dulled his awareness of the looming danger. Ironically, it was his past successes that blinded him to his own limitations. The man who once confidently navigated every negotiation now faced a verdict beyond any scenario he could have imagined. In Rick's mind, two conflicting trains of thought coexisted. One clung to the belief that he was innocent, or at least misunderstood, while the other quietly gnawed at him, a growing sense of unease becoming more apparent. Emotional resistance began to form, though he hadn't shown it outwardly. Rick still appeared regularly at the shop, chatting with staff, taking photos with visitors. But in his eyes, the familiar sharpness was gone. Instead, there was doubt, confusion, and that tiny crack in his psychological armor began to spread. The end of a legend. The fateful April morning. And then, on a sunny April morning, that crack was no longer small. It tore through the impenetrable armor Rick had once believed to be invincible. He was arrested, and the whole world witnessed the fall of an icon. Not because he lacked reason, but because he failed to listen to the emotions warning him from within. Not because he didn't understand the law, but because he thought he was above it. But in the end, no one stays at the top forever, especially when the very mountain beneath them begins to crumble. In 2023, as the sun lingered in the Las Vegas sky, an unmarked black convoy silently stopped in front of the gold and silver pawn shop, the place that had been synonymous with Rick Harrison's name for over 2 decades. No sirens, no fanfare, just figures in black suits with shiny badges quietly stepping inside. Within minutes, Rick's ordinary life came to an end. FBI agents, IRS officers, and U.S. Department of Cultural Heritage agents escorted him away. His hands were not cuffed, but freedom was a distant memory. No resistance, no protest, just a heavy, suffocating silence. Employees inside the shop broke down in tears, some capturing the moment on their phones. Within hours, those clips spread across social media. What shocked people wasn't the arrest itself, but Rick's demeanor, calm, composed, not a trace of anger or outrage. He walked as if stepping onto a familiar stage. His face held a quiet pride, almost like he was playing the lead in a scene he'd rehearsed 100 times. It was that eerie calm that caught the attention of psychologists. They suggested Rick might be experiencing what's known as high-level emotional detachment, a natural psychological response when faced with overwhelming shock. In this state, the brain temporarily delays emotional reactions to protect the mind. At the moment of his arrest, it's possible Rick still hadn't fully grasped the reality that he once seen as a symbol of knowledge and ethical business, was now being labeled a criminal. Cold demeanor. Strategy or emotional paralysis. Throughout the search and initial interrogation, Rick remained nearly silent. No resistance, no confession, just short, controlled responses, his gaze carefully managed. That behavior only made one thing clearer. Rick was trying to preserve his public image until the very end. But the question remains, was that true strength, or the quiet sign of an internal collapse already underway? Rick's arrest sparked two opposing waves of public reaction. On one side were his supporters, rallying under hashtags like #FreeRick, calling him a victim of a political witch hunt. On the other were skeptics, who had long questioned the transparency of his deals, now pointing to this moment as confirmation of wrongdoing. Reddit threads, Twitter debates, and YouTube comment sections exploded in a frenzy of public opinion. Rick stayed silent, and that silence has been interpreted in many ways, either as a calculated move or as proof that he's emotionally drained. Family. A burden unshared. For Rick's family, especially his eldest son Corey, who was expected to take over the shop, this was an unimaginable blow. In a brief interview after the arrest, Corey struggled to speak. "I don't understand what's happening. My dad never did anything wrong. At least, that's what I believe." His words revealed two things: the genuine love of a son and the emotional distance Rick had created by shouldering his troubles alone. The family had no idea about the months-long investigation. That means Rick either chose to silently bear it all, or he believed no one else needed to know. Even close friends and longtime colleagues from the show, like Chumley and the team of history experts, were completely blindsided. One anonymous friend shared, "Rick was incredibly serious, meticulous to a fault. If he's guilty, then I don't know what to believe anymore." Faith in Rick wasn't just personal, it was collective. He represented integrity, the embodiment of the American success story. His downfall wasn't just a legal failure, it cracked the very foundation of cultural trust. Shortly after his arrest, Rick was released on conditional bail. He withdrew from social media and declined all press interviews. For the first time in over 15 years, Rick vanished from the public eye. A disappearance that modern psychology calls a clear sign of a fractured soul. After the initial shock, Rick appeared to enter a state psychologists describe as functional depression. In this state, a person can still work, hold conversations, and perform daily tasks, but inside, they feel empty, anxious, and withdrawn. Rick continued to visit the shop for a few hours each day, but he no longer greeted customers or interacted with staff like he once did. The shop's internal security cameras were taken down, and promotional posters featuring the Pawn Stars cast had disappeared. Now, the atmosphere inside Gold and Silver Pawn feels cold and hollow, a haunting reflection of the inner turmoil consuming the man who built it. Preparing for trial. The growing legal pressure. The preparation for the trial took place in silence, but it was filled with immense pressure. Prosecutors brought a series of damning pieces of evidence, from tax evasion involving unreported items to using third parties to buy and sell suspected stolen artifacts. The case file grew thicker by the day, and Rick's legal team struggled to refute each point. Meanwhile, public opinion increasingly leaned toward the assumption of guilt. But Rick's silence didn't mean he wasn't affected. On the contrary, it might have been the peak of a simmering emotional crisis. Based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of psychological stages after loss, Rick may be entering the bargaining stage. intertwined with feelings of self-blame. Behind closed doors, he may have been asking himself, "Did I place too much trust in myself? Were there moments in the past where I went off course without realizing it?" On some level, he knew the answer was yes, and it tormented him day by day. In a surprising move, Rick appeared on several conservative talk shows where he declared himself a victim of a political conspiracy. He argued that his success and unconventional rise had made him a scapegoat in a rigid system. This strategy was both calculated and revealing of cracks in his logic. Rick was no longer purely relying on reason, but began turning to conspiracy theories as a shield against the harsh reality. Psychological transformation. Rick wasn't the same anymore. At this point, Rick was no longer the funny man who loved explaining the history behind every item or the one who smiled through every small deal. He had become someone else, withdrawn, cautious, and distant from the very community that once revered him. His connection with the public slowly vanished. Their trust was shattered, and the biggest storm of Rick's life began to draw near. On February 12, 2025, Rick Harrison's trial officially took place at the Federal Court of Nevada. This was considered one of the most iconic criminal trials in the history of U.S. reality television. Over 60 media outlets, both domestic and international, were granted permission to report live from outside the courthouse. The verdict was approaching, and Rick, who once believed he was invincible, now faced the final abyss: the truth. Around 200 people were present in the Nevada federal courtroom on the first day, including heritage conservation activists, representatives from international museums, legal experts, and a select group of Pawn Stars fans chosen through a lottery system. The trial lasted for 18 days, with testimony from 11 prosecution witnesses and 4 witnesses from the defense. The list of charges. The legal storm. The prosecution presented a total of 23 criminal charges against Richard Kevin Harrison, including 7 counts of tax evasion, 6 counts of money laundering, 4 charges related to the illegal trafficking of cultural artifacts, 3 counts of obstruction of evidence, and 3 counts of accounting fraud. These charges were bolstered by a nearly 14-month investigation conducted by the FBI, IRS, and the Department of Cultural Heritage Protection. In the early days of the trial, Rick maintained a cooperative attitude with his legal team. However, the situation quickly shifted when the prosecution introduced physical and electronic evidence, including internal emails, recordings of encrypted conversations, unreported invoices, and a double-entry ledger system documenting untaxed transactions worth over $12 million. The turning point on Day 6. Rick's unexpected reaction. Day 6 became a turning point when prosecutor William H. Decca revealed a series of encrypted messages between Rick and an international artifact dealer in Spain. The messages discussed an arrangement to conceal the origin of an 18th-century military document with a seal from a British university. As the messages appeared on the large screen, Rick suddenly stood up and vocally protested. Defense attorney David Marshall tried to stop him, but Rick was determined to speak out. "I have almost never received any item identified as stolen property. This is a deliberate misinterpretation by the prosecution." Judge Michael K. Davidson immediately ordered him to sit down, but Rick continued, "Then who will defend my honor? The media convicted me before this trial even had the chance." The court recessed for 45 minutes to ease the tension. From that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew even tenser. Both legal teams continuously debated the legality of the evidence, particularly the data taken from Rick's personal phone, which the defense argued had been accessed illegally. From Day 9 to 13, the prosecution focused on Rick's alleged manipulation of the accounting system. over 173 artifacts, valued between $5,000 and $80,000 each, were removed from the official inventory and only appeared in a private ledger hidden in his personal office. If you found this story shocking and captivating, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next videos. Share this video with your friends to uncover the truth behind this case. We'll continue to follow the progress of this lawsuit, exploring new details together. The murky origins, the link to artifact crime. Some of the artifacts were traced back to thefts at museums in West Virginia, Texas, and Florida, while many others still lacked confirmed legal ownership. The defense argued that these items were independently traded by third parties, with no involvement in the official operations of the shop. However, the prosecution countered with a surveillance video time-stamped in August 2021, showing Rick personally instructing staff to sort special items, storing them separately without adding them to the inventory system. On day 16, Attorney David Marshall once again requested the dismissal of the charges related to cultural property, arguing that there was no clear evidence Rick was aware of the illegal origins. However, the judge rejected this motion, stating, "Failure to ensure accountability in large transactions over many years is sufficient grounds to establish organized criminal conduct." The trial continued, but with each piece of evidence presented, Rick Harrison's armor of reputation grew thinner than ever. The final words, a moment of acknowledgement and silence. On the final day of the trial, Rick Harrison was allowed to speak before the court. Although he did not plead guilty, he admitted, "I may have allowed my emotions and experiences to cloud my understanding of legal principles." His statement lasted 4 minutes. Afterward, the judge decided to adjourn the trial for 48 hours for deliberation. On the morning of March 3, 2025, at precisely 9 a.m., the courtroom was packed. Judge Michael K. Davidson sentenced Rick Harrison to life imprisonment without parole, citing that his actions were intentional, prolonged, and caused significant harm to the nation's cultural heritage. Rick's reaction was intense. He jumped to his feet, slammed his hand on the table, and pointed at the prosecutor, shouting, "This is not justice!" Security personnel quickly intervened, urging him to calm down. Attorney David Marshall requested an appeal and a delay in sentencing to file for clemency, but both requests were denied. The image of Rick in a gray suit, handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom under the lenses of dozens of cameras, quickly became the most shared moment of the week. Within just 48 hours, a video of the sentencing surpassed 9 million views on YouTube. Rick was transferred to the Federal Correctional Complex in Victorville, California, a facility for high-security, non-parolable prisoners. Under the terms of his sentence, he was prohibited from communicating with the media and was forbidden from publishing a memoir during his incarceration. Appeal and the domino effect. 3 weeks later, Rick's legal team filed an appeal, arguing that the life sentence was too harsh for an individual with no criminal record, no history of violence, or prior convictions. The appellate court has not yet made a decision. However, the legal and cultural repercussions of the case continued to spread. Within 24 hours of the verdict, news of Rick Harrison's trial dominated all major media platforms in the United States, becoming a trending topic on Twitter, YouTube, and Google Trends. The search term, Rick Harrison life sentence, recorded over 40 million searches in the first 3 days, surpassing even high-profile trials like Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard in 2022. Cable news outlets and news platforms continuously aired the footage of Rick being handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom. The video from the courtroom, where he slammed the table and criticized the legal system, garnered over 12 million views in the first week. The media dissected every expression, every word, and even the moments of silence during the trial, turning the entire process into an unofficial political drama of America. Society divided. Public and experts. Clash. Public reactions were deeply divided. On one side were the loyal fans of Pawn Stars, who viewed Rick as a pop culture icon, launching online campaigns calling for a reconsideration of the sentence. On the other side were heritage conservation organizations, historians, and the international museum community, who issued a joint statement supporting the verdict. The American Heritage Protection Association, APA, stated, "This sentence establishes the necessary legal precedent to prevent the illegal trafficking of cultural heritage, regardless of fame or status." Immediately after the trial, several universities and academic organizations severed media ties with Pawn Stars, and Rick was removed from cultural sponsorship lists. His son, Corey Harrison, who was temporarily managing gold and silver pawn, was the only family member to speak out. In a brief press conference in Las Vegas, Corey said, "I don't deny that what my father did was wrong, but with his contributions to culture, he deserves a chance to make things right." The statement quickly went viral, resonating strongly with neutral audiences. Global reaction. The impact beyond borders. Some fan groups even organized candlelight vigils outside the Pawn Stars shop, which continued operating under Corey's management. The international media soon picked up the story. In Europe, newspapers like Le Monde, France, and Der Spiegel, Germany, described the case as a wake-up call about the fragile line between culture and commerce in the age of reality television. In Japan and South Korea, two countries that had previously displayed artifacts from Pawn Stars, local authorities reopened reviews of transactions linked to the show. Rick Harrison, once a representative of a cultural icon of American television, is now officially incarcerated at a medium-security federal facility in Victorville. While he remains silent behind bars, the wave of controversy, analysis, and confrontation continues to spread, sparking a comprehensive reevaluation of ethics, culture, and power in the age of reality television. Rick is currently serving his sentence at a facility designated for non-violent offenders serving long-term sentences. According to reports from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Rick is classified as a Level 3 inmate, meaning he is considered non-threatening, highly self-disciplined, and allowed limited interaction with the outside world through correspondence. Rick's lawyers stated that he does not oppose the conditions of his detention, but has declined all interview requests in the first 3 weeks. For the first 3 weeks, Rick wrote no letters, made no phone calls, completely silent with the outside world. Prison staff reported that he spent most of his time in the facility's library, deeply engrossed in reading books about ancient history and federal criminal law. A quiet silence, heavy yet unspoken, reflecting the internal closure of a man who once lived before the cameras of millions of viewers. By the 4th week, a subtle change began to emerge. Rick started responding to letters. Initially, they were simple well-wishing cards from children in schools, but later came longer letters from middle-aged viewers sharing how they had learned history through Pawn Stars. Some of these letters moved Rick deeply. According to an anonymous staff member from the mailroom, Rick read each letter carefully, underlining certain passages, keeping some for himself, though he had yet to respond. Controlled memoir. The name Horned. Another notable development was Rick's official submission for permission to write a memoir. The provisional title, Horned, The Story I Never Told. Under federal law, all commercial publications by inmates must undergo strict censorship. However, this move indicated that Rick was seeking to regain his voice, not in defiance, but perhaps as the first step in rebuilding his public image. At the same time, the History Channel announced the termination of all contracts with Rick Harrison and Pawn Stars. Every episode featuring Rick was pulled from the broadcast schedule and online platforms. This unprecedented action in American reality television was seen as an emergency measure to protect the credibility of sponsors and prevent reputational damage. From icon to antihero, a cautionary tale. Whether positive or negative, Rick's influence continues to spread. Some media experts argue that Rick now embodies the anti-hero archetype of pop culture, and this could open new avenues for personal brand repositioning after a scandal. The big question remains, can Rick Harrison transform from a convicted man into a cultural cautionary symbol for future generations? Right after the verdict, academics and experts in heritage conservation began raising their voices on a topic that had been simmering for years: the fragile line between promoting historical knowledge and exploiting it for commercial gain. The Rick Harrison case, once a testament to the ability to bring history to the masses, now serves as a prime example of moral collapse, where personal profit overshadowed cultural mission. For over a decade, Pawn Stars was used by more than 60 universities and colleges in the U.S. and Canada as a supplementary teaching resource for history courses. But after the case, that role was called into question, not just because of Rick Harrison, but because of the entire system that had once celebrated him as a model history storyteller. This event was not simply the fall of an individual, but a wake-up call for both the education sector and mass media. Rick Harrison had once been a respected figure in the fields of applied history, commercial economics, and media. With his extensive knowledge, he had been invited to speak at industry conferences hosted by the American Historical Association, AHA, and the Smithsonian Institution in 2016. That same year, he received the Cultural Citizenship Award from the National Museum of American History. But his downfall was not just a criminal case. It was a painful reflection of an era where media turned education into a commodity and cultural values were treated as items to be priced in a black market of intellect. Knowledge as a weapon. Analysis from the academic world. Professor Marcus Halberstam of Columbia University analyzed that Rick Harrison understood history so deeply that he could exploit it. However, when unbound by ethical standards, that knowledge became a dangerous tool. According to him, Rick's actions were not a momentary personal mistake, but a reflection of a system. Using personal networks to trade artifacts with unclear origins, removing identification labels, falsifying verification records, and intentionally concealing transaction histories, all of which represented a series of organized actions in the gray market of collectibles, where commercial value overshadowed historical value. A report from the International Heritage Investigation Agency, IHC, revealed that from 2017 to 2022, at least 47 artifacts purchased by Rick through intermediaries in Europe and Asia were flagged for involvement in smuggling activities. Of these, 3 artifacts were confirmed to have been stolen from museums in Ukraine, Italy, and Cambodia. This raised questions among experts about collective responsibility in the commercialization of culture under the influence of television. Some critics argued that the reality television industry had long allowed the rationalization of ethics, turning shows like Pawn Stars into purely entertainment products despite the lack of checks on the legality of the transactions aired. Dr. Carla Jensen of UCLA called for the establishment of a new legal framework for television programs with cultural commercial elements. At the International Council of Museums, ICOM Symposium in Geneva, Representatives from 17 countries jointly proposed a comprehensive review of all artifacts that had appeared on Pawn Stars over the past 15 years. A global campaign, the hunt for lost artifacts. UNESCO, Interpol, and various international organizations formed a multinational task force to inventory and trace artifacts linked to Rick. Not only were legal concerns raised, but ethical questions also dominated media forums, academic discussions, and the cultural preservation community. The Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania, developed a new research model, the Harrison effect, analyzing the long-term damage caused when individuals compromise ethical principles to optimize image and short-term profit. Rick has now become a cautionary example in many curricula, compared with figures like Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, and Bob Iger. Museums nationwide began overhauling their processes for verifying the provenance of imported artifacts. A federal bill, the Cultural Transaction Integrity Act, was proposed, requiring all artifact transactions over $500 to go through a federal verification system, similar to international financial mechanisms. According to a USA Today survey of over 15,000 people, 64% believed Rick Harrison's sentence was reasonable and necessary for deterrence. 21% felt the sentence was harsh but justified. Only 8% completely opposed it, and 7% had no opinion. Despite the division, it was clear that the public's attitude had shifted after witnessing the evidence and consequences of the case. Notably, Rick never denied his knowledge or expertise. He did not claim to be a victim or uninformed. His legal team's argument was that Rick acted based on his professional expertise, within the legal gray areas, with no intent to harm. However, this raises a larger question. Is knowledge, when used irresponsibly, more condemnable than ignorance? This question has made Rick's conviction a cultural milestone, not only because of the criminal nature of the case, but because it exposed the dark side of using intellect without ethical constraints. I do this to protect heritage by putting it in the right hands. The phrase Rick once used in many interviews now echoes as a self-contradiction. His downfall is not only the failure of an individual, but a warning for an era where knowledge loses its value when driven by personal ambition. Those who appreciate it, was a statement Rick shared in an interview in 2021, but it now sounds hollow and misguided in the eyes of the public. The price paid for that justification was not only a life sentence, but also the loss of the credibility, status, and cultural influence he had worked tirelessly to build over decades. Though the verdict has been delivered, the story of Rick Harrison seems to have only just begun, at least from the perspective of the public, the media, and the cultural industry. In a society driven by branding, image, and the punitive power of social media, serving a sentence has become more than just a legal punishment. It is also a way society chooses to remember or redefine a person. And for Rick Harrison, he has become a case with no closure. Just in the first week after the verdict, independent podcasts and cultural political media began to explore his story as a symbol of a systemic victim. On the Freedom Voices network, freelance journalist Mike Renaer asked, "Is Rick Harrison the image of a pragmatic entrepreneur crushed by a legal system outdated and unable to keep up with digital commerce?" His video garnered over 4.5 million views in 5 days. Meanwhile, Kayla Duran's podcast Culture Reset analyzed Rick as a cultural tragedy, where the line between education and entertainment had been blurred. On Reddit and X, formerly Twitter, the term Rick effect emerged, referring to public figures who fell from grace, yet still maintained a loyal fan base. Rick in Cinema, a collapsing icon. Reconstructed in New York, an independent documentary team announced the project Horned, The Fall of a Cultural Broker, scheduled for release in early 2026. The film not only delves into the trial but also explores Rick's influence on the global antiques market, the role of reality television in idolizing ordinary people, and the dark side of privatizing historical memory. The project raised over $1.2 million on Kickstarter in just 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Rick's legal team is filing an appeal with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, expected to be heard in Q2 of 2026. They argue that a life sentence is disproportionate for a non-violent crime and overlooks his long-term cultural contributions. Additionally, they propose a restorative model. Rick could serve the community at museums or educational organizations under supervision. Although the chances of success remain uncertain, this is seen as a potential path forward if society embraces restorative justice over absolute punishment. On TikTok and YouTube, clips from old Pawn Stars episodes featuring Rick continue to attract millions of views. Common comments include phrases like, "He knew too much, so they silenced him," or "He was too real for this fake world." This reflects how Gen Z and millennials perceive Rick, not entirely as a criminal, but as a victim of power structures. The process of reshaping Rick's character is unfolding in the third space, where he is neither a hero nor a criminal, but a symbol of the complexities of contemporary society. Rick as a mirror of society, imperfect but meaningful. Sociologist Linda Micro from Harvard Kennedy observed, "We've entered an era where perfection is no longer expected. The public seeks those who have fallen but still carry a message." In this context, Rick, despite being convicted, could still be reborn in the cultural sphere as a cautionary symbol. Not to be forgiven, but to serve as a living lesson for society about the fragile line between knowledge, power, and ethics. Even within the television industry, the discussion has not stopped. An anonymous source from ABC Networks revealed that closed-door meetings are ongoing to discuss the potential revival or restructuring of the Pawn Stars brand, not to restore its old image, but perhaps to transform it into a more complex cultural legacy with greater depth, suited to the needs of modern societal reflection. Rick Harrison, even in prison, remains a figure the public cannot stop following. The parent company of the History Channel is proposing the development of a new television project in the form of a documentary aimed at exploring the legal, ethical, and societal consequences public figures face, with Rick Harrison chosen as the pilot case. The project is still in the pre-research stage and has not been officially confirmed. The possibility of Rick returning to the public eye exists, but certainly not in the way audiences once knew him. The days of smiling beside ancient treasures and delivering his trademark line, "The best I can do is," are now a thing of the past. Instead, his return could take the form of a discussion program about the darker side of the cultural commerce industry, or a series of lectures on responsibility, mistakes, and the consequences of fame in the digital age. Regardless of the format, it is the public who will decide. Rick Harrison, a living lesson, or a name forever locked in legal records? That's where today's story ends. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more behind-the-scenes stories that are shaking the cultural world. See you in the next video.